As you know, I'm Simon Nightingale, the current chair of Shropshire Humanists, although Simon Corden, who's also here, will be taking over quite soon. Now, I've known Jeremy for a long time. Well, we've both been in Humanist UK for a long time. And Jeremy he's entirely volunteer, but he's done an incredible amount of work for Humanist UK in developing a number of things, particularly the interfaith work. And really, it's his baby. And he has run some excellent courses, one-day courses on how to contribute to interfaith dialogue. And I found it absolutely fascinating. I helped him run some of the courses. I found it absolutely fascinating and really very helpful. And one of the reasons we've got this meeting is for you to have a sort of taster of the subject. And then you can find out what it is that we find so interesting about it and what we enjoy about it. And it really opens your eyes. You meet people you wouldn't normally meet. You can discuss things with them, find out why they're different, and they find out a bit about you. And one of the great things about interfaith is that the people who go to interfaith meetings are the best members of their faith because they're the ones who want to talk to people and meet people. So they're really very charming. Anyway, I think at this point I'll hand over to Jeremy, who'll open up his slides and tell us a little bit more.
All right, so we're going to start with one sort of slightly tricky thing. Of course, this is a title which was Timon and I agreed, but it's got a word in it which, of course, is slightly uncomfortable for me as a humanist. It's interfaith, and obviously, humanism isn't a faith, but obviously the term interfaith has become so widely used in this country that I think in most cases you end up saying, well, let's not spend too long arguing about the terminology. Let's do the stuff. But but internally, what we call it, we just call it dialogue. And so I'm going to try and cover four things. Talk about dialogue and how we see it, give you a bit of a snapshot of the sort of national landscape, and then talk about a couple of encounters that I've had over the past year or so, which I thought you might be interested in. And then finally, go into a couple of worrying developments, which might lead us into a discussion. So, what is dialogue? So this, if you look on our website, this is what it says. So, and as you can say, it's engagement between people, different approaches to life, to build mutual understanding, identify common ground, and where it makes sense, engage in shared action. So deliberately, this is very, very wide-ranging. It doesn't say this is about having meetings about things or anything. And a lot of, it could be informal, it could be formal, it could be anything. Perhaps what's just as significant, perhaps more significant than what it is what it isn't. And in particular, it isn't debate. So where we differentiate between dialogue and debate, in the sense of adversarial debate, where you're trying to win. It's also definitely not about trying to convert anybody. It's not an evangelical or proselytizing activity. In fact, that to me is a big no-no in this area. And it's also not about avoiding disagreement. If you're talking to people who have different worldview to you, you're going to disagree. But the key thing is it's about having good disagreement, where you can disagree, but you don't, people don't go off in a huff or feel that they've been maligned in some way. Doesn't mean to say, of course, you don't have any red lines. Most people do, but that's what it isn't. Now, there are various reasons why humanists get involved in this, or why Humanist UK gets involved in this. Obviously, the main reason I think people do is because you think, well, we're living in a diverse society. Social cohesion is a good thing. And this is a way of contributing to that, meeting people who are different from you and encountering them. Obviously, humanists want religious people to know about humanism, just as our religious interlocutors want people to have a better understanding of their faith, and so you learn something. And obviously, you learn from other people, and so that's another reason you do it, is you learn from other and you enjoy it. As Simon said, it can be very stimulating. You meet some really interesting people. So this is now, if you look at sort of value, I just thought I'd put this up early on. So this is, you remember very recently, 2nd of October, there were these terrible attacks, a terrible attack on a synagogue in Manchester. And um, and this came out the same day. Okay. And so this is a statement from Greater Manchester Muslims who were showing solidarity in the wake synagogue attack. The fact that this came out the same day so quickly, this doesn't come out of the blue. This is a tribute to probably years of people having dialogue in the background and people knowing each other. And it's, it's a symptom of, you know, all that good work that goes on behind the scenes, and a very stark one in a very, very difficult situation. These people have personal relationships, even though they disagree. And obviously, at the moment, there's a huge disagreement in terms of the Israel-Palestine thing. But nevertheless, this came out that same day. So this stuff can have great value, you know. Um, Now, in terms of an encounter I've had, you can see this is a delightful part of London. This is actually Willesden Junction, and uh, and it's an area that has a high Brazilian population. So you can see on the right of the picture, there's a Brazilian salon, and there's a coffee shop, Mineiro, which is a Brazilian name, and this is a Brazilian coffee shop. And if you go into it, there's a Brazilian TV channel playing. Anyway, the reason I put this up was because I chose this as the location to have a meeting, and this happened yesterday. And the person I met was this guy. Um, and his name is Hassan, and he is a representative of the Muslim Council of Britain. And we met in Wilson Junction because he said he lived in Harrow. He's actually an engineer, but he was living in Harrow. I live in Twickenham, and I just looked at it was halfway between us, and this was where it was. And uh, the meeting was because visited the Humanist UK stand at the Lib Dem conference and had a conversation, and that's how I got the contact. And I said and basically the reason we got together was just apart from the fact that having a contact there is very, very useful anyway, um, was because that the interface between humanists and Muslims is one where I think we can add a lot of value because there's a lot of misunderstanding. And straight away, we sort of hit it off because he's very like-minded on that, and he's very keen to do this sort of stuff. So I'm hopeful that things will come from it. And he said, if I'm trying to stimulate a mosque to have a dialogue session somewhere, and they want somebody, how do I find a local humanist and I said, well, let me know. And we've got a network of people like Simon around the place who can step into the breach there. So we'll see what happens. But you just got to take these opportunities, and they sometimes come in strange places like this. So there's a fit, obviously, between that and the other things that a lot of other things that Humanists UK does. So I don't know whether anybody here is involved in this, but there are people who do pastoral support. So they're in, say, hospitals in particular, people who belong to chaplaincy teams. There are a few cases where the professional, the paid chaplain, the head of it, is a humanist in some hospitals. And obviously, if you're doing that role, most people are volunteers in that role. Your colleagues are people from different faiths by definition. So you're engaging in dialogue in an informal way straight away with those people. And of course, the patients, the people you're meeting, have different backgrounds as well. If you're doing ceremonies, if you're a celebrant, you're doing funerals and weddings in particular, it's not just that you met the vicar at the crematorium, but often if people are celebrants, they're finding that the families they're dealing with have people from mixed backgrounds, or you're doing a funeral and the person who's died is a humanist and wants a humanist funeral, but there are people in their family who want to say have some prayers said in the ceremony. So what? How do you deal with that? And these things come up a lot. So you're often dealing with that. We mentioned as if anyone came early, sacres. This is what sets RE syllabuses. There you're sitting around a table with people from different religious backgrounds. And personally, I'm a school speaker, and if you go into, you say, I'm in London, so you go to a London school, of course, it's hugely diverse. The kids are diverse, the teachers are diverse, the parents are diverse, and quite often, you're invited to speak on a panel alongside people from different faith backgrounds. So, you're doing dialogue informally or formally straight away in that environment. So it's important to sort of understand how to do it, as well as doing dialogue for its own sake. And of course, if you're a local group, as the group which Simon is currently chair, and Simon will be the chair, perhaps a qualification for being the Shropshire Humanist chair is that your name has to be Simon. I don't know. But, local humanist groups, of course, get involved in all sorts of things locally, and you go to local services and stuff. So this underpins a lot of things that we do anyway. Um, Now, I'm not going to do a training session here, but um, in terms of the things we run what's now a slightly changed format now. We run two short training sessions online. One is a sort of introduction session, which anyone can go to, and the other one is a deeper one, which is for people who want to get involved in this stuff to a greater degree. And so we cover some basic dialogue skills and things, but there's a few things that come up early on in this. One is you can't have good dialogue if you don't have trust. This is about people not feeling defensive and feeling they're willing to share their point of view with you, and you're not going to attack them, and same for you. So it's about it's about people, it's about building personal relationships um, and confidence, and build. How do you build that confidence when people might be uncertain? Curiosity is a key thing in dialogue. Be genuinely interested to learn something from the other person. People are very sensitive to whether you're genuinely curious or whether you're just waiting for them to stop saying something so you can get in your killer point that you think is much more important. Language can be important. How do you think about the language you use, and how does it resonate with the other person? And of course, the other big thing is be careful about generalizations. It's very easy to make generalizations, particularly about groups you might not have encountered people from before. So there's a lot under this, and we haven't got time to go into all of this now. So that's basically in a nutshell what sort of we're talking about here with dialogue and what we try and do with it, and we try and encourage people to get involved in it. Um, what's the landscape though in which we're doing that? Well, before going into that, I think it's worth mentioning a perspective which I think is really, really important. That among humanists in particular, but I think it's also true among some people of faith. Um, there's this term religion, which obviously I see as a sociological phenomenon. It's a human phenomenon. It's been common throughout humanity, and um, uh, we tend to, humanists in particular, tend to think it's very much about belief. And that's a mistake. It is, of course, belief is often very important, but it's only one of the key dimensions that you're talking about with this phenomenon. And we're talking here about religion, but you can also fit this model into a worldview like humanism. So, of course, belief is a component. As a humanist, of course, for most humanists, belief is actually a really important component of their worldview because their atheism is a part of how they identify as humanism. But it's not the only thing. So for a lot of people from faith backgrounds, and I know where there are people here from here who have those backgrounds, then there are other dimensions. Another one is behavior. Do you go to church on a Sunday? Do you pray 5 times a day? Do you stick to some dietary laws? All these things, Or do you, maybe your ethical behavior is manifest as part of your religion or belief identity. So behavior is an important thing. And then the third dimension is belonging. How do you identify yourself? How do you see yourself? And often when you see surveys and you read surveys about, in the press and things, often it's the belonging bit that really is the question that people are being asked about. It's not the belief and behavior. The census has a very simple question: what is your religion? And of course, that's about belonging. It's actually, from our point of view, a terrible question because it's a leading question, presupposes you've got a religion, and the result of that is it slightly overstates Christianity. But you've got to be careful with this stuff. Now, illustration of this. I can't sort of see everybody, so perhaps we can. How are we going to do this? Will people, if people can, are 8 people able to come off mute, Simon? If you can do that, you can just shout out around.
I'll unmute everybody.
Okay, just briefly, and we'll go back. So just guess, what percentage of UK Christians believe that Jesus was God in human form who lived among people in the first century? What do you think? Shout out, somebody.
Sorry, I'm having trouble doing this. I've got mute all. I want to unmute all. I'm not quite sure how to do that. So again, ask all to unmute. You can unmute yourselves.
Okay, somebody guess? Can you guess, or we put it in the chat?
I think we're unmuted. And then you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
15%.
Wow.
10%.
How much? Wow, these are really low numbers.
30%.
I'd say 10%.
20%.
5%.
Half.
Depends how you define Christians to start with.
Yeah.
Yes.
60%.
65.
Just talking about the UK, aren't we? What
Yeah,
percentage of
UK,
UK Christians? Well, I would say it's very small if it's the first century because of lack of communication.
Oh, no, this is UK Christians now have this belief. So I would have, it's a fairly fundamental belief for a Christian.
Ah.
90.
Right. Yes.
70%.
It's 34%. It's a third. Okay, so this is people who identify as Christians. So this is the belonging B. Okay, so only a third of people who identify as Christians in this country, roughly, because these things are never perfect, think what I think is a fairly fundamental belief of Christianity. So a third thinks he's a prophet or a spiritual leader, but not God. I'd probably think that. And 16% he's a normal human being. Oh, okay. And 15%, which I find this is the most surprising result, don't know. Which seems a bizarre answer to me.
Very bizarre.
Okay, what about we do one more, you can spend a lot of time on these things. What percentage of UK Catholics think that it's a sin to engage in homosexual behaviour? So this isn't being nice to gay people. This is engaging in homosexual behaviour. Percentage of UK Catholics think that's a sin. What do you think?
20%.
20%.
25%.
15%.
10%.
That's interesting.
55%.
It's 30%, near enough. Yeah. So 54% say it's not a sin, another 10 say it depends. Okay. Now, there are lots of these questions. I've just done two. What's interesting about these, of course, that there's a total variance between the teaching and the belief. Okay. So this is a divergence between the belonging, because all of these people identified as, in this last case, Catholics. All these people, 100% of the people identify as Catholics. Okay. And in their beliefs, or in this case, adherence to the teaching of the church about homosexuality, or in the first case, basic tenets of teaching Christianity. There are lots of these examples. Now, I could have used there's an example of a guy called David Baddiel, the comedian. And he's a patron of Humanists UK. He's an atheist. But if you look at his ex-Twitter profile, it's a one-word profile, and that word is Jew. Has a very strong Jewish identity. So his beliefs and belonging, and I'm sure you don't see him on the inside of a synagogue any more often than I do, perhaps for the odd bar mitzvah or funeral or whatever. So this is complex stuff, and these things don't always follow. So you've got to think carefully. This is complicated because you're dealing with real life and real people. So as we get into this, bear that in mind. Now, so this is a picture of the best trend data we've got on from British Social Attitude Survey of the picture in the country, and this is based on belonging, like most of these big surveys are. Okay, so this is based on belonging, and it's a long series. You can see going back to the mid-80s up till now, near enough. And as you can see that the Christian line is going down, the red no religion line is going up. So no religion is about half now. What's driving the Christian line down is the blue line, the Church of England. And that is in historical terms falling very dramatically, from 40% to 12%. It'll keep going down because if you look at that line in 2019, where I saw some age data, at that point about a third of over 75-year-olds identified with the Church of England, but only 1% of 18 to 24-year-olds did. 1%. So just with age, that's going to keep going down. You can see the Catholic line doesn't go down nearly so fast. It's going down a bit. And the reason for that is partly because Catholic identity tends to be stronger, and also because we've had a lot of immigration from Catholic countries, particularly Poland, of course, in the 90s and more recently. Two lines are going up, apart from the no religion line. One is the one I think we all know about. There's Islam and other religions, of which Islam is more than half. So that's going up. These are young populations. That line is going to keep going up. And in fact, I think that line is understated because of the way the sampling is done on this. The other line that's going up, which people don't talk about nearly as much, is the other Christian line, the green one. And you can see that that's much bigger than the Anglican line. In fact, it's about the same level as Anglicans and Catholics added together. And included in that, of course, is the United Reformed Church and the Methodists and the Baptists and all the traditional nonconformists, but they're also in decline. The growth area in that is independent evangelical churches, Pentecostals, Orthodox, because and some of that is driven by immigration. So obviously, if we take Ukrainians, a lot of Ukrainians are Orthodox Christians. So that line is going up. Of the no religion line, there's a lot going on in there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So and if you take, this is my best shot at the snapshot of the picture as it was a couple of years ago, about half non-religious, and this is how the rest, I think, break down. So it's a complex picture, but bear in mind, this is just about identity. It's not about belief or practice. Although in the case of the non-Christian religious, there's more coincidence. So for Muslims, for instance, tend to be big on practice and big on belief. All right. And if you look at it nationally, then starting at the top, Scotland is, in terms of more non-religious people, Scotland is the least religious part of the UK. Not surprising, Northern Ireland is the most religious part, but Wales is second to Scotland in its non-religiosity. Of the English regions, London is by far the most religious or the least non-religious, and that is really driven by immigration primarily and massive diversity. It's the largest Muslim population as well. All right, so that's this landscape. Now, if we turn to the non-religious, by the way, a lot of people say, well, it's 50%. Sociologists say, there's something interesting here. Let's have a look at them. There was a very interesting study done a couple of years ago by Theos, which is a Christian think tank, but they do some very good stuff and, very respectable people. And they looked at what they called the nuns. They didn't put this in that report, but just for your information, about 90% of the non-religious people are white British, okay, disproportionately high because it's 75% roughly of the population are white British, so it's disproportionately high. But they split them into three, or us, I should say, as a non-religious person, into three segments, which sort of resonated really. The first segment was what they call the spiritual nuns. So this is done on the basis of a big survey. So, good quality stuff. And so get about a third, more men than women in the first segment, the spiritual nuns. And these are people who say, I don't identify with a religion, but they are big on, so it would include a lot of people who have New Age beliefs, crystal healing, big belief in supernaturalism of various sorts. Okay. And this is a significant proportion of people in the country. They may have a vague belief in a traditional God, but that don't identify with a particular religion. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. So that's one. The other end of the spectrum is what this group called the campaigning nuns. This is opposite. It's more men than women. And these tend to be people who are very on average, anti-religious. Okay, so they think religion is a source of discord in the world and it's a bad thing, and we'd be better off with less religion. Okay, so a lot of the angry atheists are in here. And in the middle are the other third is what they call the tolerant nuns. Who are slightly younger than the other, and there's a roughly even gender balance. Now, those of you who are humanists here, or non-religious here, you probably recognise some of these. Not many humanists are in the spiritual nuns bracket. Most people I've met are in the tolerant nuns, and there are a few in the campaigning nuns category. Okay, but when you look at that 50% non-religious, it covers all of these. Okay, so it itself is very complex. In fact, where any segment you look at, take Christianity, take just Anglicanism, massive complexity. And the same is true in Islam, huge complexity everywhere in this stuff. And the same is true of the non-religious too. But of course, everybody has a worldview and everybody has beliefs. So that's the landscape we're in. So let me just talk about a couple of encounters I had, one of which is is significant. In April, I got an email from a woman called Sheena MacDonald, who I'm a big fan of. She is actually the chief executive of Theos, the think tank I've just referred to. Interesting character. She's an evangelical Christian, a brilliant person, and she's a black Christian as well. So that's a big part of her identity too. Cambridge theologian, intellectually brilliant. And she said, there's an event, will you come along to this event at the Bible Society? Because there's a report they're doing. I think you would be interested. So I went along to this report. And the launch of the report, it was called The Quiet Revival. And this report had got a lot of coverage because it was very dramatic. Remember the lines of we were looking at just now, Anglicanism, Catholicism in decline, Anglicanism in particular, total Christianity in decline. Well, what this report was based on a big survey YouGov did, so a respectable polling organisation, about 30,000 people, so big sample. And what it found was that there was a huge increase in church attendance going on. They compared 2018 to 2024. They did this study twice, and they found a 50% increase in church attendance between 2018 and 2024. They say busting the myth of church decline. So this was revolutionary. And in the meeting, there were a lot of, wasn't that many people there, but there were some press people there, but there were obviously a lot of people who were evangelical Christians in the room. There was somebody sitting behind me who was said, "Well, I'm not surprised because I keep hearing about more people having dreams where Jesus features in the dream, and this was a fulfillment of this." It was a very big thing, and I left thinking, "Wow, this is things I thought I knew. We need to rethink this." So dramatic stuff, and it led to a lot of press coverage. Here's an example. Press Quiet Revival Streets, Church Ascendance Shores. This is GB News. Incredible Christian revival. Because one of the parts of the report was that this growth was being driven by young people, particularly young men. So this is completely different to what everyone's expectations were. There's another sort of sub-bit of it because there was some denominational breakdown in their statistics, and it showed a particularly high growth in Catholicism. So here's a piece in the Telegraph by Catherine Pepinster, who's a Catholic writer, and celebrating this huge increase in attendance at Catholic churches. So, dramatic stuff. But then I came out of this meeting. I thought, well, this is going to hit the press. I phoned up the Richie Thompson, who Simon will know. He's the head of public affairs, director of public affairs at Humanists UK. And like me, he follows some of the statistics. But we had a couple of comments. He said, wait a minute, there's something funny here because it doesn't fit with the data we've got from the churches. And what he meant was things like this. So this is from the Catholic Church. And so they give data on mass attendance. Okay. So in 2019, before COVID, mass attendance was about 700,000 people. And COVID hit, obviously everything went very low. And then in 2022, there was recovery going on. And then 2023, it went up a bit more. And the result was in the Tablet, the Catholic newspaper, there was a headline, big increase in mass attendance recorded in Britain. Okay. But of course, that was true if you compare 2023 with 2022, but not if you compare either of them with 2019. It's a big decline. And the Church of England has very comprehensive data. Every year they come out with a thing called Statistics for Mission with data in it. And that also didn't give this picture, the picture that the Bible Society were painting at all. It was more like this one. And as it happens, I think it was either last week or the week before, they came out with their statistics from Mission for 2024. It takes them a while to compile the data. And they obviously had a chance to include in that a response to the Bible Society. And this is what it says. By almost every measure in almost every diocese, Church of England attendance and participation was lower in 2024 than in 2018. Okay. And this is, if you look at the blue squares, the dark blue squares, similar picture to the Catholic one. Okay. So they basically say, don't know what's going on, but the data doesn't paint the picture that they recognize at all. And similarly, a number of Christian commentators also said, this is funny. We're not seeing thousands of new people coming in at all. This is Christian bloggers. David Robertson, now lives in Australia, Catholic, one of the sort of wee freeze Presbyterian in Scotland, very hard line, but knows the data. Very cautious about this. And then there was a report by David Boas, and he's a heavyweight. He's the Emeritus Professor of Social Science at the University College London, one of the people behind behind some of the British Social Attitude Survey. He says, he didn't question the sincerity of the people at the Bible Society, nor did I. I've met them. They're great, lovely people. They're specialists. They were looking at the data. What they concluded was absolutely correct on the basis of the data that they had. But what he was able to show was why that underlying data, you couldn't use it to come to the conclusions that they came to from it. And so of course, there were increases going on anecdotally in some areas. The evangelicals said there was a low-level revival, which may well be true, but it's nothing like what was being talked about. Haven't got time to go into what was going on, but there are links. I'll send you the slides. There are links. Basically, it's been refuted. There are things going on though. And that green line going up, all sorts of stuff going in like that. Has anyone heard of the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God? You see it refers to London here. Universal Church of the Kingdom of God is set up by the guy called Edir Macedo. He's Brazilian. He's a billionaire. And this is evangelical church, Brazilian-based evangelical church, preaches the prosperity gospel. You see that picture of what looks like a cinema there? It was a cinema many years ago. It's called the Rainbow. I remember the Rainbow because when I was a youth, we went there for concerts. I saw prog rock groups at the Rainbow and all sorts of people. Anyway, they bought this and it's taken over London. The scale of this is unbelievable. This is their turnover last year was £15.7 million. And if you think, oh, this is just London, this is where they are. They're everywhere, including coming to a location near you. A lot of young black people get involved in this. And the danger with it is a lot of them end up losing a huge amount of money. It's not called prosperity gospel for nothing. So there are strands within this growth which you've got to be a bit careful about. So, is this right? No, it's not. But there is growth, as we saw, mainly in the new independent evangelical, Pentecostal, Orthodox churches. Immigration is a significant driver in that. But that growth is being eclipsed by the decline in the mainstream churches, particularly the Church of England. Obviously, it's going to even out at some point or other, but that's what's going on. All right. Now, I think they call this a segue, so I'm going to try this because I realize I need to speed up here. We mentioned about the Bible Society. The Bible Society, this is their headquarters in Swindon. It's in a business park, so it's not very exotic looking. But this was their headquarters, built in the 19th century. Beautiful building, the British and Foreign Bible Society, and it's in Queen Victoria Street, as you can see, in the shadow of St Paul's. That building is still there, and I visited it earlier on this year. I was invited to visit it, and it was an off-the-record meeting, so I won't talk about what was going on in the meeting, but nothing particularly exciting as it had turned out. But this is what that building is doing now. It's the London headquarters, the London office of the Church of Scientology. I don't know how many £1 million this building is worth, but a lot. And what you can see in these pictures, there's a few things just to point out. Firstly, there are crosses. There's a cross above the door, and there's crosses inside, and it's called the Church of Scientology, and it has ministers and stuff. Interesting, because what I learned, because obviously I as a dialogue guy, I asked them a lot about Scientology, and they were very good to tell me about it, is it has absolutely zero to do with Christianity. There's no element of Christianity in it whatsoever. If anything else, it's got some occult or Eastern basis to it. But but this was in the States. If you want to become acceptable, then you use terms like Christian. You have chapels and ministers and stuff. The other thing you notice here is there's nobody in the picture, and that was also an interesting thing because there's this vast building, hardly anybody in it. This isn't the only building they've got in London, by the way. There's another building in Tottenham Court Road where, and this is another one. This is the one near you, the Church of Scientology in Birmingham, where they've bought a stately home and similar sort of thing inside. Yeah. And they've got these centres you see in various places. What's interesting about this map, which is from their website, is it doesn't have the biggest place, which is their UK headquarters. So the London building is not their UK headquarters. The UK headquarters is near Crawley in Sussex. This is it. It's based on a stately home. It's called St Hill, and it's enormous. So the original stately home is the big bottom, and there's a lot of money in this. A lot of money. And obviously, as you know, very controversial group. And the impression from the people I met there, and as an exercise in dialogue, it was an interesting thing, was that their beliefs are very sincerely held and they have a very strong identity with Scientology. And to them, the criticisms people have of them seem unfair. They say, well, what our overall aim is to have a happy life, and what's wrong with that? It started off not as a religion, but as a thing called Dianetics, and they still use that term, which is basically a home-built version of psychology. And so they're hostile to modern psychiatry and psychology and therapy. They have a sort of basic utilitarian approach to things, but there's no philosophical underpinning at all. They don't know. When you ask them about philosophical questions, they don't know anything about it. They are very uncritical of acceptance of the claims, including of their own founder, whose life is very well documented because he only died in 1986. And they're very sensitive to criticism and are actually quite litigious. So won't go into any more, but that was a very interesting thing. And you'd think there are hundreds of thousands. They claim 120,000 adherents in the UK. From the data I've seen, it's probably nearer 2,000, most of them living in Crawley or near Crawley. Now, finally, two worrying developments. You know this guy. I think everybody would know this guy. This is Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lemon. He had this big march, very right-wing, anti-Muslim, Unite the Kingdom rally in London. There were a number of people, Christians there. There was this guy, Bishop Kieran Dewar, a bishop in the Confessing Anglican Church. And here he is, it rained that day, unfortunately, with his bishop's kit on, doing bishopy things. Then there was another guy, Bishop Brian Tamaki. He's a New Zealand Maori. He has his Maori warriors doing a sort of hacker type thing. And here they are tearing a banner with secular humanism written on it to destroy it. And this guy, Pastor Ricky Doolan, who's a Pentecostal musician, as you can see, and he claims credit for he's brought Tommy Robinson to the Christian faith. And he did so during visits to him in prison, because Tommy Robinson tends to spend quite a lot of his time in prison. Okay, so on the march itself, there were a lot of Christian symbolism. The people with wooden crosses, you can see the crucifix on flags, and so on. Now, for a lot of Christians, this isn't very good. And here's Tim Farron, as you know, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, himself an evangelical Christian, calling it a dangerous moment for Christianity. Because obviously, Tommy Robinson stands for everything that Tim Farron disapproves on. Tim Farron would say, well, these are very non-Christian values. there's an interesting Guardian piece on this, and they quoted academics referring to this phenomenon as Christianism. So this is the appropriation of Christian symbols as a symbol of white nationalism, basically. Okay. So you've got very fringe people, faith people. There were no mainstream, Christian leaders here, but you've got the crosses and everything. This is the appropriation of symbolism. So that's one thing. I think actually more worrying is another one, and it's these people. There's a guy in this picture made to look like a stained glass window. In the middle with a halo is a guy called Paul Marshall. He's a hedge fund manager. He's a multi-billionaire. He owns the Spectator magazine. He part owns GB News. He's a big philanthropist. He's an Anglican from Holy Trinity Brompton Church, which is the sort of evangelical lead in the Anglican community, and very sincere in his Christian beliefs, and he wants to bring the country back to Christianity, but he's very right wing. And of course, GB News, Nigel Farage has a program on GB News, and it's a right wing channel. And there's a lot of money in this. Then there's this guy who you may also know, and again, very, very sincere in his beliefs, Danny Kruger. Interesting, he's the son of Prue Leith, the chef. He's just defected from the Conservatives to Reform. He made a speech in the House of Commons, almost empty House of Commons, but it was the House of Commons, so it's on Hansard, very important, therefore, about the Church of England. And he also wants to basically turn the clock back and have the church as a major power in the land and so on, very much in line with what Paul Marshall has been saying. And of course, linked to this, Nigel Farage, of course, is a big fan of Donald Trump. Then there was the news that Nigel Farage has appointed a right-wing anti-abortion theologian as a senior advisor. That theologian is a guy called James Orr, and again, a very serious guy, very knowledgeable. He's a theologian. He's an associate professor at Cambridge University. This is him on the left. And on the right, you probably recognize, this is J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the US. And they are very close personal relationship. And they basically, seek to bring American-style evangelical and cultural war to the UK. And there are one of the groups that are involved in this is a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. They, in the States, that America, the Roe versus Wade, the legislation which gave abortion rights to women across the states, was overturned by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago. They were the primary group behind it. They're very, very wealthy. They're probably futilely trying to do this here, but they also are doing things like supporting the Elon Musk style free speech things. They have 12 full-time staff now here in the UK. So, to some extent, we, and I include liberally thinking people, whether they're humanists or religious people, we're under attack to some extent from this. And I find that worrying. At the same time, there's a lot of other bad things going on, which, you know about. So my feeling about all of this is, goodness sake, we know dialogue more than we ever did. So I'm going to finish, you'll be pleased to hear, with this person who you may know. This is Joe Cox. And of course, somebody who was murdered for her views. And this is the famous quote that is often used from her, and I think is absolutely right. And that's why I'm involved in dialogue. Okay, I've talked for much too long. Sorry, I'm stopping.
Jeremy, that was really splendid. I must say, a lot of new stuff there I haven't heard before. A lot of worrying stuff. Um, can I maybe ask the first question? There's a limit to what we can do, humanists, that is, the non-religious, to influence Christians. Surely this is something the Christians have got to set the house in order themselves. Not just the Church of England, but United Reformed Church, Unitarians, and all the other nonconformists to join with the non-extreme evangelical Church of England to stand up to this and not just stand by. How can we persuade our friends in the church to do that or help them do it?
I'm not the right person to ask that question of, really, am I? You need the new Archbishop of Canterbury to, but it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult for her because, of course, Holy Trinity Brompton is an Anglican church, and there will be splits within Anglicanism, within evangelical Anglicanism as well. So it's very, very complex. And I think, though, all people can do is express their own views about these things. That's all you can do. And if those views are driven by your faith, of course, that's the right thing to do. But I think also Christians can object if they see the symbols of their faith being appropriated. I think that's a legitimate thing to be upset about. But I don't think it's up to me as a humanist to do anything about that. But I think that's something you can do. So no, you're not representing me when you're waving a cross in the Tommy Robinson rally.
When I was talking to the Archbishop, to the Bishop of Hereford at an Interfaith meeting on Tuesday, this is exactly what he said. He said they were particularly worried that they'd appropriated a Christian symbolism in this sort of hateful diatribes they have.
Yeah.
Now, more questions. If you have a question, put your hand up and unmute yourself. Who's got a question? Any Christians here who'd like to comment on their fellows in the church?
Charles has got his hand up.
Far away.
Right, I'm back in business. Yeah, you may recognise me. I'm Bedford, really, but I did live 25 years in Shrewsbury, and it was a very happy time of my life, so I'm very emotionally attached to the place. Thinking back to your figures on church attendance, there was a very abrupt dip in everybody in 2020. Now, surely that's to do with COVID and distancing rules, because it is to do with physical attendance in a place. And what's happened since is a leveling off and things have gradually recovered. So it looks to me as if you take out the dive in 2020, you've got the steady decline just carrying on. It's all completely imaginary, the Great Revival.
Yes, it is. Yes. In fact, the look at the Church of England one we've got, where that what you're talking about is clearest. It's not even back to the trend line yet. So, but of course there is a small wrinkle in that which complicates it, which of course the most churches introduce some online participation as well, and that's quite hard to measure, and some of that is still going. So that complicates it. But you're absolutely right, Charles. Yeah, agree completely.
Simon Corden, you got a question? Unmute yourself.
Hopefully I'm unmuted already, but Jeremy, that was absolutely fascinating. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but really illuminating. Thank you. The question I have is on that last segment about Christianism, if that's the correct phrase. It was quite alarming. How alarmed should we be? And what do you think we should be doing as humanists in this case?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you talk about somebody like Tommy Robinson, obviously humanism is a non-party political, and I know people who are quite, right wing who are humanists, but I don't know anybody who is a Tommy Robinson supporter who is a humanist. So, yeah, I think so. Obviously, I think a lot of this comes down to values. And I think defending value is becoming the most important thing. And my guess is that values cut across whether you're a humanist or you identify as an Anglican or a Muslim or something, there are a lot that broadly with a small L liberal values can cut across everything, And so I think emphasizing shared values is a very important way of doing that, and recognizing that those are shared by people who may identify with faith as well. I think the other thing is not demonizing the people who are on everybody who's on the Tommy Robinson March as well. I think there's a big mixture of people on that, and maybe we should try and use the dialogue approach with some of those people as well. So what is it people are frightened of or disturbed by? What's going on? So I think we have to be a bit careful about that. There's complexity everywhere. Tommy Robinson himself, of course, is just what they call a grifter. He makes a living out of this stuff, and he's getting all his money from rich Americans. But
yeah, that's what's concerning, is the money being thrown at it.
Yeah,
and the mouthpieces, if you like, that they've got, not individuals, but GB News.
Yeah,
and printed media. That is hugely powerful, and we've seen that in the States.
Yeah, you're right, Simon. Yeah, and I think if you know that rally, they had, the various speakers. The one who was top of the bill, appeared by video, was Elon Musk at that rally, telling us that there's going to be violence in the streets. Who knows nothing about this country at all. Really.
Subject of a whole different talk, I guess.
Yeah, it is. So I agree with you. The money is very worrying, and I think in particular, ensuring we have legislation in place that prevents foreign money buying political power is that's a very important thing.
Trevor, you had your hand up for a while. Now, Trevor Dobson is also works for Humanist UK.
Yes,
volunteer capacity, looking after our sacres.
Yes.
Trevor,
hi, Trevor.
Unmute yourself.
I think I have. Have I unmuted myself?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, Jeremy, thank you so much for that. It's rekindled my interest in the subject. I've vaguely read about these extreme Christian organisations, but I'm going to do some more work on it. So my question is, and I hope I know what the answer is what can Humanist UK do not in the short term, but in the long run, about ensuring that our young people get more of an introduction to a non-religious philosophical worldview in schools?
Ah, right. Well, there's two aspects to that. One is obviously, as you may have heard just yesterday,
yes,
there's an important decision which very much affect what you're doing, Trevor, and those of us on SACRES, which is that RE is going to become part of the national curriculum. It's going to take quite a long time for that to happen. And obviously, humanism is included in the RE curriculum in many places, and I end up speaking in schools quite often because of that. But I think that one of it is to ensure that people know that there is a coherent, well-considered way of thinking about the world, which doesn't have a religious point of view. That's one, if people are non-religious. But I think just as important, given that half the population does have a religious identity, is to help people ensure, and that's where the dialogue thing comes into play, that people can see that that you can have common ground, you can have sensible discussion, you can agree on things and disagree well with people who have different views. And I think that's something which we can bring to play in schools as well. And it's particularly good if you have, it, as often sometimes happens, you go in and you find you're on a panel with other people. It's how you are behaving on that panel and how you're listening to the other person on the panel and respecting their view. That you're saying this is the way we should behave in a plural society, and I think we can do that. And I think the more we can introduce that way and help other people do that, like, why I was particularly keen to have that conversation with the guy from the Muslim Council of Britain, because he has that thinking too. And if we can help him pursue that within the Muslim community, that would be terrific, because it's not widely done in the Muslim community at the moment. So I think there's two things, two aspects. One is humanism itself, but also is dialogue.
David Howard. Unmute
yes,
yourself.
Yeah, fine. I'm unmuted now. You mentioned Paul Marshall and the influence that he has, particularly in terms of GB News and so on. And this fits in with this pattern of money buying influence to promote not just political views, but religious views as well. Isn't that something that, as humanists, we need to be challenging? In terms of the impartiality that we expect of news channels, because GB News, for example, is getting away with absolute murder. The odd little rap on the fingers from off, nothing more than that.
Yeah, very difficult, because of course, if they started taking a strong line, of course, straight away people say, well, this is this free speech thing, and this just illustrates how the liberal establishment is against people with a right-wing viewpoint, and so you can see how it would play straight away. So it's very, very, and of course you should defend people who have a right-wing view. They have every right to express their views, same as everybody else has. But it's what you're saying is about bias, and it's very, very difficult. And and you take the BBC being attacked from the left and right, and often making mistakes. It's terribly, terribly difficult. Don't have a simple solution to that. I mean, if only we had a few billionaires, lined up, that would be very helpful. Unfortunately, we haven't.
So, Maggie Izzard, unmute yourself.
I thought you were saying Maggie is a billionaire and is willing to.
Maggie is. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Maggie.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm not a billionaire, but never mind. Okay, just wanted to say about a few days ago, I was watching that series on BBC iPlayer called The Tropics of Cancer. David Cummings, is it? I think. Anyway, it's a program all about following the Tropic of Cancer all the way around the world, and he came across where was it? Taiwan. And he noticed, he made a very strong comment about how the different religions were virtually located within the same buildings, and how the whole thing just seemed to function side by side, which I thought would be absolutely marvellous. Why have this sort of rivalry, which we seem to have at the moment?
Yes, that's an interesting thing. Of course, well, there are two things there. One is, I think, this going back to what is religion. I think the concept is rather different in the Chinese world. That you get people who go into different temples, and will make offerings and things. They may be Taoists, but they will go into a Buddhist temple, or they might go into. They don't have that same compartmentalization that we have. So that's one aspect to it. So I think that there's a bit of a difficult read across. There is some. I mean, going back to the conversation I had with the guy from the Muslim Council of Britain, he was talking about what are often called prayer rooms in shopping centres and airports and stuff, and we do have those. And he said, often people are saying, well, that's there because Muslims need to pray 5 times a day, so they that's what it's often used for. But he said, and that's true. Obviously, they like to see them. And he said that people in shopping centres, running shopping centres, like having prayer rooms, by the way, because people use the prayer room, and then of course they tend to do some shopping. So it's profitable. But he said, well, why shouldn't they just be quiet spaces for anybody? Yes, Muslims would use them for their daily prayer, but if you want to do some meditation or you want to just have some quiet space, just to calm down a bit, it's a place to go. Why not? And those, we do have a little bit of those places. So it's not quite so alien, but I agree with you, Maggie, that it's not happening in quite that way. And I remember when there was an instance where I think one of the cathedrals had a Muslim iftar meeting, and then there was huge objections because this is reducing the space, and this is a Christian space, and it shouldn't have Islam representative. Whereas, of course, the people running it said, no, this is how we're expressing our faith, as welcoming others, and why not?
Thank you, Jude.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Yeah.
Jude, mute yourself.
I'm trying. I've done it. I'm successful. Sorry. Thank you, Jeremy, for that so far. I've actually put something in chat to you, but I'll read it out. It's easier, isn't it? Do you think hypernormalization has a large part to play in today's society? People are disillusioned with failing systems and may turn to religion to find meaning.
So can you say that again? I didn't care. Do you think what has
hypernormalization?
What do you mean?
Shall I expand on that? I have actually had a definition from AI, which I very seldom use.
Yeah.
It's a term popularized by filmmaker Adam Curtis and originally coined by anthropologist Alexei Yurchak, refers to a societal condition where people recognize that systems, economic, political, or social, are failing, yet continue to behave as if they are functioning normally. This phenomena has profound implications for economics and accountability. That's because I asked it about from an economic and accountability point of view. But one of the things it came up with was power concentration. Economic power becomes increasingly centralized. Banks, corporations, and political elites reinforce each other's dominance, creating a feedback loop where money begets power and vice versa.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more, but I think it does have an impact on religion and society, because I personally think systems are failing, very much so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that touches on sort of another issue which isn't really related to what we're talking about here, but I agree with you that one of the things that's happening at the moment and is likely to happen with the growth of AI is small numbers of people becoming mind-bogglingly wealthy, and hence able to pursue their own agendas. And I mentioned Elon Musk. Peter Thiel is another one who, is a very has a very radical, what we call, Christian nationalist, but he also doesn't believe in democracy. Really, he'd like to see the tech bros really should be running things, and he's got the money to make it happen. Because these people have unbelievable wealth, and that's a big issue. And there is a sense in what's driving a lot of people into the arms of people like Tommy Robinson is that discontent and the sense that things aren't getting any better in lives. And so it's a bit of outside what we're talking about here, but I agree with you. I think it's a really, really severe problem, and if we don't face it, it's going to bite us. Yeah, I agree with you completely.
Thank you. Charles Bailey.
Thanks, Simon. I was interested to see your three pillars diagram, because I don't know whether you invented it, Jeremy, or I know that I got it from you, that the believing, behaving, belonging.
Yeah.
Three-legged stool.
Yeah, it's not. It wasn't me. I didn't invent it. Yeah.
But I got it from you, so I always associate it with you. And I've always found it immensely helpful in when religious people are talking, in thinking, where's that thing? Where's and because it's a as an analytical tool for listening to religious people talking, it's unparalleled. It's superb. One of on believing, one of the things that I've always been very wary, because we're both at Sacre and in school talks. One of the things I've always been very wary about is saying Christians believe that, or Catholics believe that, Muslims believe that, because one of the things I say to the kids is that you, when it comes down to it, you can't choose what to believe. From within your worldview, the way you understand the world, something is either believable or it's not. And that's down to you. So I always sort of resort to a periphrasis, like Catholics are officially taught that, or that kind of thing. But because, as your little quiz pointed out, it's very difficult to predict from their religious affiliation what people actually believe.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in the training, sometimes they use, a picture of a woman wearing a hijab, and what do you know about it? Well, she's female, and she's a Muslim because she's wearing a hijab. That's all you know about her.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all you know about her. You don't know anything about what she thinks about anything.
No, you don't know whether she's wearing it willingly or under compulsion.
Unwillingly. You don't know whether she's, on her way into her role as an evolutionary biology professor. You just don't know. Yeah. And that's what makes it interesting, of course.
Quite.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Alison, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Well done.
Has that unmuted me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't know how to get the virtual hand, so I put up my real hand. Fantastic talk, thank you. I suppose what I was going to ask was about the graph of trends over time.
Yeah.
And you said that certain things would either go up, continue to go up, or continue to go down because, the current population that identifies this are young, or the current population are old.
Yeah.
But that implies that that people aren't changing over time.
Yeah.
And is there any significant, if we think quite a lot of us probably have been on a journey and changed in our lives, what sort of proportion of people would you expect to actually change over time? Or do you expect people to be fairly fixed from where they were in the 20s?
I don't think people are entirely fixed. The non-Christian religions, in terms of identity, tend not to change very much, because that if you're from an immigrant community, that identity thing is quite a big part of your life.
The belonging. Yeah,
the belonging. So somebody I know who's he wears a turban, and if you filled in a questionnaire, he'd probably say Sikh, because he wears, and that's how he was brought up. And he does know the people at the local Gurdwara, but he's not really, he's not.
Yeah.
He has a very different view, So these things are very hard to pin down. So I think that element of it is fairly sticky among Christians, particularly Anglicans, less so. But I think the much bigger effects among Anglicans, because we've had a lot of that line going down, has indeed being that it's okay now socially to say you're not religious, whereas in the past often it was vanilla to just say, what are you? Well, I suppose I'm a Christian, sort of thing. That's the reason why the census tends to overstate Christianity, by the way.
Right.
And you can see there's one measure of that is that the gap between the British Social Attitude Survey and the census, when in 2001, when the census first asked the question about it, was enormous because of that effect. It's still significant, but it's much smaller. So that identity things. So people do move around, but I think a much bigger effect is simply, mortality.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Simon Corden.
One sneaky last question, if that's okay.
Oh dear.
Which no. I've heard you mention more than once the ability or becoming adept at disagreeing well.
Yeah.
Is there kind of training available on that?
Well, yeah, there are one or two sort of things you can do to make it easier to do that. Some, simple tricks you can do. It's like you can say, key thing is acknowledging people's views. So if somebody says, "Well, I have a strong belief in, let's say, something about the afterlife or something," and you can say, "Oh, I really understand why that's an important thing. I can see why that would be very important to you for whatever it is. Then you can say, as you might expect, I have a different view to that, and then you can say it, and then you're acknowledging the legitimacy of the other person's view, but you're still disagreeing with it. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are
it's kind of fishing for any kind of
but you can
UK kind of
you can
guidance
do
training.
Yeah, but there's nothing really, this is about just having good conversations with people. And then when you have a relationship with respect for the other person as a human being, as opposed to necessarily respecting all of their views, but as a good person, then you can strike up a relationship where it is fine to disagree, and the more you get to know, the safer it is to venture into areas of disagreement. To start with, you often think, "Oh, you're not quite sure about that." Another thing you can do if you're straying into that area is to ask the person permission about straying into it. So you can say, "Do you mind? Is it okay if I ask you about so and so?" And almost always they'll say yes. But then you've acknowledged that might be a sensitive area, and they've given you permission to have it. So there are things you can do like that. Yeah.
The training course, the one-day training course, actually is extremely helpful. I can really recommend it. If it's free. Very good. Well, if there are no more questions, it's up to me to thank Jeremy for really an extraordinarily interesting and good talk. And thank you very much, Jeremy, not just for this talk, but for all that you do for Humanist UK and developing dialogue. I mean, it's something that I really enjoy, and I really think it's important. And I would encourage others of you to think about getting involved as well.
Don't underrate your own contribution to that, Simon, because you've been extremely helpful to it as well. Yeah.
Good.